Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Election Day 2020. What are we going to know at the end of the night? Well, it's a great question. It's anybody's guess at this point, but Lance and I are going to break down what you can expect to find. We've got a record 89 million early votes cast in this country, more than ever before by huge margins. And based on current projections, overall, if everything continues, we should surpass 150 million votes for the first time in American history. So there's a lot going on. Obviously, today or over the course of the next several days or next several weeks, America will know, hopefully, who our next president is going to be. But that's what we're looking at today. It should be obvious, I think, why you care. This determines the course of the country for the next 4 years, who our next leader is going to be. Things have gotten pretty heated on both sides, but here at the State of Us, we're keeping it, trying to keep it calm, collected, and based in reason as we talk through what you can actually expect to find out on election night based on some of the states that Lance and I are the most interested in. So that's what we'll be looking at today. But of course, we cannot begin a conversation on all things politics and the 2020 presidential election without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, you have to be excited after 6 years on this program that we've been talking about getting people out to vote. We could see record numbers of voters in this election. So that's the first thing. And then I'll start off with it's a very good positive outlook here. The second is as you are waiting for results today or for the next week or so, think about that for a second. And remember, with all these people voting, of course, it's going to take a little bit longer than it might usually because you have more people doing something. And secondly, even though it isn't normally part of the discussion, these state laws have been in effect for a long, long time. So as people are complaining now, hey, maybe because you voted and are paying attention, we can actually work to change some of these things so that we can do a better job of reporting the vote. But don't get upset that it's going to be leading to some kind of fraud. These are the laws that have been in place for the last 7 or 8 presidential elections anyway. And so there's no reason to get uptight because nothing's happened before. It really shouldn't. It's not going to happen this time. This is the laws. And it's the first time that as a nation, many of us are paying attention to what the state laws say.
It highlights what you and I have talked about before, right? That whole one election, but really 50 small elections. And that's part of what makes this year in particular, with everything going on, the number of early votes, it really highlights those differences more because typically early votes in 2016, I think, accounted for under 30 million votes. So we're talking about 3 times that many early and absentee ballots cast this year. I mean, 3 times the amount that we've ever done before, and as many as over half potentially of all ballots cast this election will be early ballots. You know, it's quite possible that over half will be.
And it's not illegal, right? I mean,
No.
You pointed out this has been done before. You know,
Right.
It's not like this is some kind of new thing, conspiracy theory that's out there. Oh, we're going to have everybody do this so the election can go one way or the other. This is a law that's been in place for many, many years in states. And unfortunately, there's not one set of laws that covers everybody. So you're thinking, well, here's what we do in our state. That's probably what everybody does in their state. And as you pointed out, Justin, that's not the fact. So just because your state or one state that you've heard of does it a certain way, it doesn't mean that all the other states do it that way. So it is very confusing as we wait for election results to be turned in.
Some of the differences, Lance, include things like when polling locations close, but specifically in regards to early voting, right, mail-in ballots, the way that it works in every state is very different. Some states report balloting differently. So, for example, in some states, early votes are reported first, followed by the results that night, followed by anything that arrives later. And not all states will accept stuff that arrives later. For example, Florida's a state, Lance, where if a postmarked ballot, right, if you mailed it by the deadline and it's postmarked, right, from the post office, and it says it was indeed mailed on time, but the post office doesn't deliver it in time, in Florida, your ballot is not counted, right? So it can arrive late. If it does not arrive by election day, it's just thrown out. So it arrives, it gets thrown out. Even though you did your part, right? You did what you were supposed to. You sent it in by the deadline and the system messed up. Your vote's not counted. So now, but that's not the case in all states. And that's one of those big differences. The other thing is, under what circumstances could somebody have requested a mail-in ballot and then show up in person? Because that's the one I think that gets a lot of attention from folks. In some states, you could have requested an absentee ballot and still vote in person. And then in other states, you can't really do that. So we're going to talk through the states that are listed as a toss-up. But before we do that, Lance, I just want to say, I know, because I think I'm probably one of those people, and maybe it may not let on this show, that there's a lot of people are anxious about what's going to happen today and in the coming days. And hopefully you'll stick with us on the State of Us and encourage family and friends to tune in, because Lance and I are going to try our best to be that voice of reason as this election possibly drags on well past one night and into more than one day, and possibly, a lot of the things that I think we're all somewhat concerned about, regardless of who you're supporting, right? Not only who wins, but what if we're not sure who wins?
If you're questioning us, go to the show page and connect to the articles that we're using today. The main one is the New York Times, and it is from them where we're getting a lot of this information, where it breaks it down state by state. Don't argue with us. We're just presenting the facts. And I just quickly counted up. There are 23 of the 50 states who accept ballots arriving after election day, but there is a plethora of those 23 that have different dates. So they're all coming in at different times. Nobody is trying to pull a fast one on anybody. It's just that this election, it's been brought up by candidates in this election that this could lead to voter fraud, but it's never been in the past. So why would we expect it now? Because these are the same rules that everybody's voted under in all the other elections, and there's been no distinguishable voter fraud. So it is just a time thing, folks. That means don't believe whatever you hear tonight on either end, because what we're telling you is it's going to take time, particularly depending on how quickly these votes get cast. And as Justin said later, as we go through the show, which states they're coming from, because some states, it doesn't matter that they're going to come in late. And that, once again, is our electoral college system at work.
And that's where really pay attention to, percentage of votes counted. That's what, as those of you listening to today's show, listening to results tonight, your cable news coverage, right? Really pay attention to that, because look at the things, right, that are the non-disputables. Try to tune out the pundit side of what's being said and that's why I'd encourage our listeners, both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times on their websites are doing written coverage of the election in real time. I would very much encourage you, if you're weary about cable news, go to their websites, because I think it's all the election coverage is free. You're gonna get a little bit more of the factual side and a little bit less of the opinion side. But if you're gonna watch, right, what you're looking for is percentage of votes counted, right, in various states, and what that's telling us. And also listen for, right, the indications of whether or not the percent of votes counted includes the early votes, because as Lance has highlighted, and as we walk through these states here, you're going to see that some of them don't count the early votes until the end. Okay. Some start with early votes, others do not. And that's very relevant when you're talking about, and again, they all have their process for calling a state, right, for somebody. And we're not necessarily saying that that's an issue, but just as you're thinking about what a state looks like, try to keep that stuff in mind, because those are those are some important things that, generally speaking, are available to everybody that you could go find on your own. It's not something that any particular cable news or media outlet's bringing you.
And if you're listening to this show after Tuesday, it still is very important, because if the election hasn't been decided, which most experts agree, we're breaking down why it hasn't been decided yet and what states you should look for and why and when the decision will be made, which happens more often than not in history, just not often enough for us to be aware of it.
I'd also like to point out, Lance, because in the next segment, we're going to get into the 6 states. There are 6 that are currently considered toss-ups, right? They're within the margin of error for the 2 candidates. So I know there's a bigger list than that that's considered quote unquote swing states, but we're going to look at the ones that are currently for sure toss-ups. You know, the average of all the recent polling indicates we just don't know which way it's going to go because they're in the margin of error. Now, the one other thing I wanted to mention, Lance, is we did a great episode a few weeks ago about the Electoral College, right?
Yes, we did.
Please go listen to that because it's only a couple weeks old, and it really is, I think, an excellent way to learn not only about the Electoral College and what happened, but then we even did an episode before that, Lance, right, about a different way of predicting the election. And we'll have to see if either of those hold true. And I think that one's called Who Will Win the 2020 Election, and that was maybe a month ago. Those are both excellent listening, so be sure to check them out. And we're going to look at the 6 states that are considered toss-ups and what you need to know about each of them. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
We've got 6 states in the 2020 presidential election that are currently toss-ups as of Election Day. And what do we mean by a toss-up? We mean that based on the average of recognized national polls, they are within the margin of error, okay? So, or they are just outside of the margin of error, so they're so close that they really could go either way. And yes, there's more than 6 states that are quote-unquote swing states, but these are the 6 that currently are considered toss-ups. We're going in alphabetical order, Lance. We're starting with Florida, okay? The timing of results, here's what you need to know. All early voting and previously tabulated mail ballots, which are likely to be relatively stronger for Mr. Biden, should be reported by 8:30 p.m. All the times, by the way, that we're talking about are Eastern time, just so everybody knows. We're talking about Eastern time. Officials did not make a projection for the timing of full unofficial results, but they were allowed to process early arriving mail ballots starting weeks before the election. So Florida is one of those states, Lance, where they've already begun the processing, right, of all of your early votes. And so we should be able, right at 8:30, most of those should be known that came in at least a while ago. Because again, as mentioned, they've been processing them for a few weeks. And the polls close at 8 p.m. Technically, most places in the state close at 7.
Well, these laws are in place because of the 2000 election. And Florida does not want to be the center of attention like it was in 2000. And so, honestly, folks, Florida should be one of the states that is reported the earliest. And could be a real key in the election process, because when you look at the board for the race to 270, if Florida goes to President Trump, it could be a more drawn out election process as we count all the ballots. If Florida goes to former Vice President Biden, it could be the so-called finish for President Trump, because for President Trump to get to the 270 electoral college votes that he is needed to get elected, Florida is a key. President Trump must win Florida and get those electoral college votes if he wants a pathway to 270. Vice President Biden could lose Florida and still get to 270. So this is an early one that could tell us an awful lot about how long we have to wait, because Florida should get their votes out pretty early. And if Florida goes to President Trump, then we need to keep watching. If Florida goes to Vice President Biden, it pretty much shuts out President Trump to getting to 270 if everything else falls as everybody expects it to.
The next one up, Lance, is Georgia, which is again listed as a toss-up. Officials did not provide an estimate, but said that because of the large volume of mail ballots expected, it could take a couple of days for all of them to be scanned and counted. The Secretary of State has said he expects the winners of most races to be announced by November 4th. But again, this, we just don't know from a presidential standpoint, because there is no order to the reporting of ballots in Georgia. So it's basically just, different boards of elections are going to do it their different ways. Georgia, though, is not a state, Lance, and we should mention this with Florida. Both of those are not states where a postmarked ballot can arrive later.
Right. There's not going to be any change. Whatever they have on election night is what they count. And, it just depends on how much you want to get into this, whether you just want to look at a cursory glance and know what's going on, or if you're getting into it, this is where you pay attention to what Justin said. And that is, look at the percentage of votes. And if you really want to go down the election rabbit hole, start to pay attention where the votes are coming in. Are they coming in from downtown Atlanta? Are they coming in from the suburbs? Are they coming in from rural Georgia? Because those places have a history of voting a certain way. So not only do you watch as Justin pointed out, the percentage of votes that are coming in, but if you really want to get technical, look and see what votes are still out and where they came from and where they're still waiting for them, because that is key too in some of these larger states.
Next up is Iowa, and officials said that they were confident that they will have unofficial results, quote, in a timely fashion like we do every election, end quote. The polls close in Iowa at 10 p.m. Again, that's Eastern time. Absentee ballots are likely to be counted first, and postmarked ballots can indeed in Iowa, they are allowed to arrive late all the way up to November 9th. So again, they still have to be, keep this in mind, folks. This is really important, right? They still have to be postmarked by election day. Okay. So you cannot, nobody's voting after election day. Not a single state in the union is doing that. Okay. You still have to have certified via the United States Postal Service that your ballot was indeed received at least. And some states are more than just on election day, but some states do allow a postmarked ballot by election day, but nobody's voting after election day, right? There's none of that. There's no November 4th voting. Everybody either voted on or before November 3rd. That's what's happening. And so that's the case with Iowa. Yes, they can arrive late, but they're expecting results in a timely fashion.
If it's not close, we can pretty much bank whatever the result is. But if it's close and they have a number of outstanding mail-in ballots still to come in, then it'll take a few days, because they have up to a week in Iowa for their ballot to get in and be counted. No matter which candidate you're campaigning for or that you think should win, I would think that you would want everybody's ballot who followed the rules, who followed the law, to be counted.
We have been spoiled, and we've talked about this a few times this year, by thinking that we know who the next president is on election night of every year. But in reality, for most of our country's history, that was never the case. So as people, inevitably, if we don't know tonight, right, if we don't know and people start freaking out, listeners of the State of Us, you have a responsibility to share with other people. This is not unusual. Just because none of us have lived to really experience it in full swing, or maybe have only experienced it once or twice, this is how it used to be all the time. Until the Electoral College convenes in each of their respective states in December, we do not have a president-elect. And most states don't certify their election results until mid-November.
And that's why the states have these different dates, is because by law, they don't have to have it in anybody's hands until the voting of the Electoral College in December. This is the way it always is, which is why these 23 states have different days up until which they will accept postmarked ballots because they know in the past they've always had that time.
Next state is North Carolina, Lance, which is still a toss-up. Early votes and processed mail ballots, which are likely to be relatively stronger for Mr. Biden, will be reported around 7:30 p.m. Election day results, which are likely to be relatively stronger for Mr. Trump, will be reported between 8:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. Officials estimate that upward of 98% of ballots cast will be reported on election night. So, and North Carolina, Lance, early in-person and processed mail ballots are what are released first, as we just explained, and postmarked ballots can arrive up until November 12th. But again, North Carolina election officials saying, basically, unless it's, which it could be, and this is the real kicker here, right? North Carolina is a toss-up. It could be super close. And if it is super close, those ballots that are arriving after Election Day will make a big difference. And we might not know until November 12th there.
North Carolina is just an interesting race because it was an Obama state that then went to Trump, that is in a lot of flux right now, basically because of Charlotte and the growth in North Carolina in their tech industries and their business areas that have caused North Carolina to start to be an interesting 21st century state. It's one that typically was always Republican, and it's just an interesting one that those of us who follow presidential elections have been following in the last 20 years, much more closely than we had in the past.
We've got 2 toss-up states left to take a look at. And Lance, honestly, nothing against the states that we've talked about so far, but these last 2 are my favorite ones to talk about because one of them is obviously our home state, and the other one, the great state of Texas, Lance, currently a toss-up in polling results. So to find out what the deal is with Ohio and Texas, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Willer.
The state of Ohio, Lance. Yes, for those of you that don't know, that is where Lance and I live. That's where The State of Us is recorded. And Ohio is a toss-up this year.
A bellwether state?
Yes. As many of you know, right, Ohio went strongly for Trump in 2016. Ohio also supported Obama for his 8 years in office as well. And I think this is one of those, the one that always comes back to me, Lance, and yeah, we're biased, but no Republican has won the presidency without Ohio, I think it was the 50s. So generally speaking, right, this is another one of those kind of like Florida. Biden could probably win without Ohio. Biden could probably win without Florida. But if Trump loses either, or especially if he loses both, I'm not sure that there's a pathway anymore for him. So in terms of timing of results for Ohio, ballots cast before Election Day will be reported by 8 p.m. tonight, and they are likely to be relatively stronger for Mr. Biden. They will be followed by those cast in person or those that are arriving on Election Day. After election night, no more results will be released until final certification, which has to be done by November 28th. Now, it could be sooner than that, but it might not be until November 28th because Ohio is saying, look, we're not going to release anything after election night until we release the official results. Absentee ballots cast in person or by mail, okay, those happen first, followed by your other stuff. And yes, postmarked ballots can arrive late all the way until November 13th.
If you watch Ohio and Florida, both of those should come in compared to the other states at a relatively early time frame. And if those go for President Trump, Ohio and Florida, we could be in for a really long process. And if though Ohio and Florida go to Vice President Biden, it's pretty much over. And I think, Justin, every map I've looked at, every electoral college map I've looked at is basically without Ohio and Florida, the president can't get to 270. So it could be a very quick night for all of us. if Ohio and Florida, which are two of the early reporting states, go to Vice President Biden, we're going to know the results pretty quickly.
Ohio is a state where postmarked ballots are allowed to arrive late, but Florida is not. So we could know something about Florida, and Ohio could still be up in the air when you head to bed. And so you might be in this very interesting limbo between those two states because, again, this is highlighting they don't follow the same process. It's different in both of those states. And that really could be a very realistic scenario, especially since Ohio is one of the states that won't release any results after election night until everything has been certified, which generally, historically, usually takes about a week. And that could be one of those, and we're going to talk about Pennsylvania here in a second, I think, Lance, even though it's not a toss-up, that could be one of those things, along with some other states, that could cause the problems. Even though we're going to know a lot early in terms of early vote, if we don't know right away with Ohio, we won't know probably for a while. Next one and last toss-up, Lance, is Texas. This year, the average of the most recent polling puts Texas in toss-up territory. No estimate has been provided by election officials for the share that will be reported by Wednesday. Because an excuse is required to vote by mail in Texas, officials do not think that processing those votes will result in delays, though increased turnout could. So they're basically saying the mail stuff they're not so worried about, right? But they are worried about they may have a lot more people show up, and that could slow things down.
Texas, like North Carolina, is one of those states that in the past 20, 25 years has seen a lot of influx of people from outside the state. And so that's why it's just interesting to look at all of these. I'd be remiss just not to throw a plug in here that we're all really interested in the presidential race, but you need to watch what's going on in the U.S. Senate in all of these states. And those might be able to be counted a little bit faster. We'll just see how they're reported. But as those of you who always listen to this show, but if you're new, we understand that the president can do a whole lot more if they have congressional backing. And there are interesting Senate races across the United States, even in some of these states that are leaning blue or are solidly blue, solidly Democratic, or solidly Republican. They have some interesting Senate races. And the outcome of those Senate races is going to determine the difficulty of the job of the president, no matter who wins the election.
And if you're listening today and you haven't voted yet and you're just like, I don't know, right, if it really matters if I go vote for the presidential election, hopefully, or if you know people like that, you remind them you have a lot of local elections where truly, 5 votes can be a deciding factor. And so please go vote for those things, because a lot of those things, as Lance and I have told people so many times, those are the things that truly impact your day-to-day life. We're going to talk about Pennsylvania, and then we'll hear a word from the Devin Creature on what he thinks is going on. But Lance, you feel strongly that we got to talk about Pennsylvania because it is technically leaning Democrat, but it's got one of the longest descriptions on this article linked at thestateofus.org, right, about the timing of results. Here's what it says. Secretary of the Commonwealth, Kathy Bookarv, said that she expects the overwhelming majority of votes to be counted by Friday, November 6th.
Stop right there. Okay, I know the next sentence is really important too, but notice, folks, the person in charge of counting the votes is telling everybody in this New York Times article up front that we hope to get the majority of votes counted by Friday. Okay. So to expect anything coming out of Pennsylvania to any kind of definitive answer, just sit back and relax, chill tonight. Okay. As we wait the rest of the week to hear from Pennsylvania. So if Pennsylvania is the key battleground state, which is where yesterday the presidential candidates spent their time, they spent careening around Pennsylvania. And I'm not saying they're wrong. The person in charge of counting the votes says, we'll let you know by Friday. Okay. And then that's not all. Okay. That's the big one. But the next one's a big number 2.
Well, if you're wondering, why is that the case? Why is Pennsylvania going to take so damn long to let us know what's going on? Well, that's because, folks, Pennsylvania is one of these weirdos where officials cannot begin to process mail ballots until Election Day. So they cannot do anything with all of these ballots, these millions, right, of early ballots that they've received. They can't do anything with them until Election Day. And listen to this. If there are a significant number of mail ballots outstanding at the end of the night, the reported totals could be relatively stronger for Mr. Trump. And that's because type of ballots reported first. Officials did not specify in what order they would, but in order to prevent large swings in results, again, Secretary of the Commonwealth said she is asking counties to report mail votes routinely instead of all at once. Okay. So they're going to try to keep the results mixed in their reporting. In other words, she's directing people in their counties, right? Go ahead and you're obviously counting, right, people as they're there voting in person, but let's count throughout the night as opposed to trying to do it all in one chunk, your early votes, your absentee votes, because otherwise you're going to see, it could look like, oh my gosh, Pennsylvania's going for Trump. And then all of a sudden, and that's what happened in 2016, right? And that's part of why, for those of you that are longtime listeners, the State of Us covered the 2016 election. We had called Pennsylvania for Hillary Clinton, and for this very reason right here, that they didn't report results evenly, even though 60% was reporting and there was a huge margin for Clinton, it was just enough to flip the other way because there was this giant amount that had not been reported yet. And they happened to favor pretty much all of them Trump.
Last but not least, in Pennsylvania, can postmarked ballots arrive later? Yes, by November 6th. But the United States Supreme Court may consider a Republican challenge to this date after the election. Okay, so as you can see, Pennsylvania has a really big play here, particularly if, as we said before, Ohio and Florida go to President Trump.
It's a mess.
The key could be Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania by law is a mess. And the Republicans are considering a Supreme Court challenge about which votes should be counted in Pennsylvania. So if you're like most Americans, and I think you want an answer sooner rather than later, you don't want us to have to count on Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvanians' election laws are confusing and are already in the forefront of Supreme Court challenges of the lawyers that you've been hearing about. So, like I said, if some of the other states, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, whatever, fall one way or the other, it could take Pennsylvania out of the mix and we could know something. If those states, though, aren't the determining factors and it comes down to Pennsylvania, it could be a long, drawn-out process for us.
Now, Lance, the moment I think that pretty much everybody's been waiting for this entire show, a quick word from the Devon creature on thoughts about today's election. What are you worried? What are you hearing, right, from people that you talk to? Are other people worried? What's the pulse of Gen Z in the state of Ohio? Yes, we're asking you to speak on behalf of all of Gen Z in the state of Ohio.
So that's a lot of pressure. I will say, actually, I have noticed not a lot of people that are around my age group are talking about it right now. As surprising as that sounds, I mean, I can't really remember anyone talking to me about it. And so I haven't had much of that discussion besides like with you guys. Maybe that's because I see most of the Gen Z people I interact with at my workplace. But for me personally, I'm somewhere in between, like worried, but also hopeful for the outcome that I am wanting. But I'm really unsure of where it could go because of so many different pressing issues coming. And then even with whoever gets elected, we still have like all the Senate that needs to get elected and just to make the president's job harder. So it really depends. I think it's going to be an interesting 4 years regardless. I'm just ready to kind of get it over with and know at this point.
Yeah, one of the results that I think the pundits haven't talked about as much, Lance, and I know we got to end here, that I just want people to keep in their mind is the possibility, right, that the presidency stays with Trump, but that the Senate changes hands. And that would be a very interesting dynamic, because then you would have a fully Democratic controlled legislature, right, instead of a split like we have right now, and a Republican president, and that would be that'd be something. So
it would make our job easy for the next 4 years if that happens. I think issues would be a plethora of things that we could talk about. But my biggest takeaway here is as we close the show today is I want everybody to think about, no matter what the outcome, that what we have facing us is we need to work the next 4 years and most likely longer of trying to put the great United States back together again. That we need to get away from this division, and no matter the outcome or how the outcome is configured in this election, we need to get back to putting the country first, not the Democrats first, not the Republicans first, not a political party, but to put us as American citizens of the United States of America first. And let's start working together to solve some of the problems that are facing our nation. Instead of pointing fingers at one another for whose fault it is, let's come together and solve the problem. That's when America is at its best, is when we come together and we agree that there's a problem and we work together to solve that problem, instead of doing the playground finger pointing at each other as to whose fault the problem is. Let's quit acting like children, and let's come together as a mature nation and figure out how to solve these problems that we all agree that we have.
Couldn't agree more, Lance. And I think that's what the State of Us is trying to do, right? I mean, we know that there's an appetite for this because people are listening to this show. They're telling other people about it. And that's kind of what we're all about, right? That's the mission that our company, True Chat, is working to do. That's the producing entity of the State of Us. We're all pursuing, all of our podcast radio shows are pursuing this one common goal. What is that goal, Lance?
Well, it's pretty simple, and that is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. There's not a whole lot there. I mean, there's a lot there, but it's not a lot of words. We're not trying to espouse a whole lot of different ideas. This is very simple. We're trying to educate folks, and we're just talking honestly and openly and respectfully. And that respect word is one I think we need to get back in our society, no matter whom you cast your ballot for. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. We just need to get back to that respectful conversations. And if you like our show and you'd like people to listen to it and they say, well, where can we find it? Then you just tell them that the State of Us is on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is a syndicated radio program and a podcast. You can find the podcast by 4 a.m. Eastern Time, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Keep an eye out for possible special edition episodes this week, election week, as we may be releasing a few additional ones in there. And the syndicated radio show can be heard on the weekends in select talk markets around the country. So be sure to check out your local talk station. If they don't currently have the State of Us, call them up. Tell them they should. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Bush, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.